So welcome everyone who is with us via Facebook and Zoom. I am Rabbi Deep Solomon, and I'm really happy to have you here tonight. I'm even, I have to admit, really excited to have this conversation with our guest, Myriam Steinberg. She is the author of the newly released graphic novel, Catalogue Baby, a graphic novel. And her experience is quite extensive, and her book, I think, is a real gift. One of Hasidah's part of our mission is to build awareness in the community and destigmatize infertility and provide support. And I think this book does all of those by naming so many issues that that happen when someone experiences challenges to building their family. And I think we said, if a picture says 1,000 words, this one's got millions. So Myriam, welcome. This is Myriam Steinberg, who's with us. She has a former career, which you hear a little bit about in the book, in her music festival. And being an author is a bit of a new title, but you are now officially an author. So welcome, and thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, me too. So for everyone who's there, if you want to send any more questions in, you can put them in the chat, and I will pay attention as that's going. Also, feel free to chat if you just want to say, oh yeah, I agree, or follow up there. I'm perfectly comfortable with that. Just let us know, because this is going to be a little bit more of a conversation. As Myriam runs to get her power cord, and she will be back to make sure we can continue the conversation. We do have a lot of questions that were submitted, we have in advance, but I also know as the conversation comes up, more things may come in. So please feel free to join in. And as you know, again, neither of us are experts per se. We can speak from our own story. And I think that there is a lot here. So I'm going to start. I have specific questions about different things you shared, but I thought really the first thing to kind of ask you about is, you might say about becoming the whole journey to go in there, but I'm actually going to start with a graphic novel about infertility. Tell us a little bit about how that came about.
So as I was going through the years of trying to have a baby and going through pregnancies and losses, miscarriages, and a whole bunch of other things, at some point I was like, I feel, first of all, that there aren't enough resources that speak to me to help me through everything that I'm going through. You get little snippets here and there, you get little paragraphs, you get little mini stories, but they're never really in context. And it was also not necessarily stories that were something that I experienced. And so there was that aspect, but there's also the aspect that just, so much happened. There was all the joys and the grief and the hope and the despair, but intermingled with all of that, there's a lot of really ridiculous moments. And I think it was the ridiculous moments that kind of got me and was like, this is a story that is more than just black and white. There's so many nuances to a fertility journey. And the fact that there are absolutely ridiculous, silly moments and like, what the heck just happened to me moments, kind of gives it an extra punch. And I think that really helps lend itself to, at first I thought it was going to be a play, like a one-woman show or something like that, but I cannot memorize anything to save my life. So I was like, okay, and I didn't know, like, how do you even start writing a play? So I kind of nixed that idea. And then eventually I landed on a graphic novel because writing a memoir with just words just felt like either there there weren't the appropriate words to describe what was happening, and the really visceral and intimate moments and emotions and everything that was happening, or they would just take too many words to explain and you just kind of get lost in it. And I'm a very visual person, so I felt like being able to see what was happening just in one bang and then have the words kind of highlight and help the story along. But really I feel like looking at it and watching it brings you into the story in a much more deep way.
I agree. It was my reaction to many of the things that I saw, and I'm going to follow up on that because there was many of the images, and there's a couple that I want to ask about specifically where I just thought there is no words like you could explain this and you still can't understand it until you've like been in it, as is everything in life. You could never be in someone else's shoes, but the picture said way more than any words I had ever said. And I also thought the interesting thing to kind of add to that is that I think it's also helpful for people who have been through it as well, not just in it, but to have someone who can really capture in a unique way what it was like. That words, you're right, words just don't catch it, and then it would be too many words. I really liked it, and I knew you when you were starting to do this, not like knew you, but like I knew about this, you're doing it, and I remember thinking, really? How does that work? And I am thrilled you stuck with it, because that was kind of the piece I was missing, the fact that words are not enough. The other thing you said, which I want to follow up on a bit, and I am hoping you can actually share a picture with us, but I have to figure out which one it was. There was a question about this in terms of context. And one moment. Oh, I don't know where the question is, or which one the picture was. Oh, here it is. Page 13. Do you have the picture of page 13?
I do. I will share that screen
Awesome.
with you.
It was the first one. I went looking down the list. It was my first question, and you said it right away. Too easy. So I thought that one of the things that when we hear so many stories about infertility, as you mentioned, is it doesn't take into account the context. So I kind of want to name that. Like a lot of times when people talk about infertility, it is the procedures and the losses. And I'm not going to minimize that for a moment, because the procedure, the losses, the emotion, the doctor's visit. But what is missing is the fact that it is in context of so many other things. And I thought this image was really powerful because of the fact that the issue invades everything and kind of gets us at this deep level. And if it invades one part of your life, it goes out and hits others. So I wanted you to talk a little bit about this piece, especially because some of these things got buried, but some of these things it seems you came out to get. So can you just talk a little bit about this picture and how these losses, these contexts that were your life, I'm just gonna say they changed clearly. So can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, sure. So back in the day, I was organizing a festival, and I gave my all to this festival. And I worked on it for 11 years. And as I was working with the festival, I knew deeply that I wanted a child. I wanted to start a family. I wanted a partner. I wanted to have the career. I wanted to have the partner. I wanted to have the baby. I wanted to have, like the whole thing, the fantasy, right? And as I was nearing the 11th year, I was really starting to burn out. And by the time I hit 39, I was like, oh my God, not only am I burnt out by the actual work that I'm doing with the festival, but part of me was like, I just wasted 11 years of my life because I didn't spend any time doing what I needed to do to find that partner, to have that baby, to have that family. So it was kind of a double whammy for me. It was like the loss of the career that I found really inspiring and really powerful to work on, and also the loss of that ideal of creating a family. And so that was that's one of the gravestones there. And I ended up having to shut down the festival. And it says, one of the gravestones says, "Rip in the house festival, better you than me." Because if I hadn't shut that down, I wouldn't have started my fertility journey, and I wouldn't have had the mental and emotional space to kind of go there. And then the second gravestone is kind of like the death of the whole love and co-parenting dreams, and then it also says so much for that. Because I started a relationship a couple months before my 40th birthday, but they weren't ready for kids. And so when I kind of broached the topic, probably about 5 months in, they're like, "Oh, maybe in 5 years or so." And I'm like, "I can't wait 5 years. I'm 40. Like, that's just not happening. I can maybe wait too." And then they ended up breaking up with me a couple months later because they're like, they didn't want kids. They weren't ready for it at all. So then all of a sudden I was like, okay, historically I've had these big breaks between partners, and there is no way I would be able to find somebody and mutually fall in love and decide that it was the right time to have a baby and then try to have that baby. I would be in like 96 by the time that happened. And so I gave myself until my birthday, so about 6 months, to find somebody. And then I told myself if I didn't find anybody by my birthday, I was just going to do it on my own. I did take steps to at least get an appointment because I heard there's a big waiting list at the fertility clinic, and it was a good thing I did. But yeah, that was really the death of the whole ideal of having a co-parent, and a family unit that included 2 adults and the children. And then there's the rest in peace baby dreams, which fortunately it ended up that it wasn't that. But it could have been. It was this close to not happening. And at the time I was like, yeah, I'm hooped. What am I going to do?
I also noticed that. That's why I thought it was fascinating that the image of that, these are these things that are all gone. And you have another image that is a bit of hyperbole of you're being resuscitated just before you've lost your identity. And the fact that these two on the outside, your soul and your baby dreams, you do dig out your soul. But the image, I think, reflects, or maybe I should ask, from what I'm hearing, is that's how it felt though. And you had to dig yourself out of your grave there. But we also have that baby dream. So can you talk a little bit about then, because I know we do have some single women who are coming here too, then how did you talk about the process of kind of resuscitating that dream? That's actually, you don't directly get it in this book. This one, we get the image of you getting out your soul and what do you do? But tell us about this. How did you resuscitate the baby dream?
It was a primal drive. And it was like nothing was going to stop me. And one of the things that I really realized throughout the journey, because, I did a whole bunch, I did IUI, I did one DIY, I did IVF, I did double donor, so many steps, right? And I realized throughout that I wasn't ready to quit until I hit that wall that was just like, it's impossible to go on. And I'm a very pig-headed, stubborn, mule-ish person. When I have a goal, I'm just going to do it. And so, between that and my biological clock going crazy and the really visceral need and desire to have a baby, it was just I kind of tooth and nail just scraped myself up by my and like, just to put a mixed metaphor, like pull myself up in the bootstraps and just like really I went for it. And it was now that I had it took me about a year to kind of get to an okay place after the burnout, like just kind of get over the burnout. I'm still actually not really fully over the burnout. It's amazing how long it can actually last. Um, but to get to a point where I was functional, and I did a lot of self care. I did a lot of climbing. I climbed like 6 days a week. I um, really built my community around me, um, and they helped me like kind of strengthen myself emotionally and spiritually, and with like just knowing that I had a support network behind me that was going to be there every step of the way, and also um, documenting. I didn't know what I was going to do with the documentation, but I had decided I was going to document everything, photograph, video, like absolutely as much as I could. And somehow that also kept me grounded because it was an extra little project. So it was like all these things that made this big mishmash of healing and getting to a place where I could go on and try to have that baby.
So I actually noticed that in your book. I was talking about it with someone else and we noticed it. One is that, and I can tell our listeners that there's a short clip and it's amazing because it covers years, but the video is less than 2 minutes. And it's so powerful to watch years go by and it's this. And whoever edited that, please, like, it was amazing. So we did see that. And in the book, there are a couple scenes where there's someone taking your picture. So you drew it. So can you pull up page 25? There was a couple of things that I wanted to ask about this image. And one was that it seemed to me that it was fascinating because in sometimes, like, this is not you. This image is an outside perspective looking in. So that was one of my things about when you're going through this personally, about when you would be seeing yourself from within, and what did that mean to also be looking from yourself from the outside. And then and also talk about this page, because the image of this was the picture where I thought, this is the closest that comes to reflecting this, because I thought, I don't know how you can be in these. I went through this, it was a day, and I remember that day. And so can you talk a bit about that perspective of both being in yourself and not being in yourself, and how that influenced your writing this? And specifically, how did it help you process when you were going through things?
That's a very...
Sorry, that was a big.
That's a lot to unpack.
That's this image. Like, that's just it. Like, you have so much in there because it's like you're in the moment, but you're out of the moment. And I know that when you're going through this, you're also in it and you're documenting it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I thought all of that was in this picture.
Yeah, and I feel like especially by the end of the whole fertility journey, it's like your body's not really your own anymore. And so you're kind of always looking at yourself from the outside and being like, okay, well, there's this procedure, there's this needle, there's this, and like all the doctors are telling you what they're going to do and what you're going to do. And it's just kind of, you're just doing the steps that are necessary. And there's very little of it that is physically comfortable. and so like privacy means nothing anymore. And physical autonomy, in a sense, means almost nothing anymore. You're being poked, you're being prodded. And it's always by outside people and people who are telling you what your body can and cannot do. And so, like, I'm living it and I'm feeling the needles enter my body and I'm feeling the ultrasound wand explore my uterus and my ovaries and all the things. And I'm hearing the counselor ask me questions about, do I know what I'm getting into by using a sperm donor? And all these things that are happening to me and I'm feeling it. And I know that it's affecting my journey because it's going to tell me whether or not I can have a baby. It's going to tell me whether or not I'm emotionally ready for it or physically ready, like all the things. Um, but then it's like you have this whole list of things that you need to do. And so that becomes the outside part. And the more years you go through it and the more losses you have, or the more failed pregnancies that you have, or the more failed attempts at pregnancy that you have, the more outside you become, because it's just, you need to create this shell around yourself so that you're not constantly in a state of grief. And you need to like hold on to hope, and you need to hold on to all these things, and sometimes you have to give the hope away to somebody because you don't have the space for it anymore. And so again, that becomes an outside factor. And so yeah, it just, things happen to you so that they can happen for you, if that makes sense.
It does. And I think that I'm wondering if also part of it is like when you said you have to have someone else hold it, I'm wondering if there's also a piece of that where um, taking that bigger perspective and reflecting on you is almost also when we do that, like, when we talk in our head, like I have the higher level of me that kind of talks to the, what did you say earlier when you said like about your emotions were this not visceral but this core, kind of this in your core, and we separate those things, and sometimes you have to let that part of you float up and kind of remind you about the hope and put it in perspective that we have these different parts of us. And to me it seemed like part of it was that person within you holding your hope and your grief and just kind of observing you from the outside.
Yeah.
And when you're going through it, it's you vacillate between both. You're physically feeling, you said you feel it, but you also have the perspective at the same time, it seems.
Yeah.
So not necessarily in a particular order, but another thing that that I thought was interesting is after you had and I apologize that I don't remember the order. You had a couple procedures, the donors, and there's a part of the book about you when you talk about your grandmother. You mention your parents, and you also share very transparently their support for you and your gratitude for that. There's also, though, some significant conversations with your grandmother, and I thought that they were probably like a little more than just the words on the page. Can you talk about your grandmother in this story?
Oh, oh, my grandmother was a sweetie. So she was, I think probably when I started the whole process, she was in her, I think she died when she was 96. So she was probably about 91 or 91, I think, when I started. Um, and I'm the only one of three girls that my parents had who is having babies. And so, and my dad's the eldest, and I'm the eldest of the eldest. And so there's kind of like this thing. And I know that even though she never said anything, there was a, there was just something that I knew how important it was for her that she had a grandchild from my dad's side of, of the family. Um, and so I was really, really excited to share it with her. And I knew that she didn't have all that much longer with us. And um, and so I would share things with her, and she was really sweet and really cute and really perspicacious. And she would say things that meant a lot to me. And she's not a very, like, she doesn't talk very much. And so when we had these conversations, it was the most that I'd ever had of her kind of divulging herself and talking about her beliefs. And because she's Orthodox, she's Jewish Orthodox, or was Jewish Orthodox. And she had a very deep belief in God, but it was also a really interesting perspective that she had, because it was like, she very much acknowledged the unknowable, and that uh, certain things you just believe because you just believe it.
And how did you relate to that? I mean, was it just, I can imagine to some degree it was like a connection. I know for many people going through it, one of the things that weighs on them is that connection to past generations, the concern about the future. But she, I think also, I'm just sensing, and I don't really know, but it seems like did she like also kind of represent something for you in this journey? Like sometimes it's hard for us to connect to them and we can get them through other people.
Um, I guess she represented a lot of like solidity in the family, and that like she was very much a presence in my life from the time I was a baby. Um, and there was something about her, especially as she got older, and actually much more accepting of things and people and their lifestyles and all that stuff. As the older she got, the more accepting she got. And um, and she was a very grounded person in a lot of ways, and I really admired um, how she dealt with life, how she dealt with death. I became really close, even more close with her when her husband died, when my grandfather died, um, because I think I was privileged to see emotions that she showed to nobody. Because I slept in her room actually for the full time of uh, yeah, for the for 7 days after he died, and and I saw her cry, and nobody's like, she doesn't cry. But she had a very pragmatic way about it too, right? She's like, it's very important to cry. You need to let your emotions out. And so I think that probably also informed, like when I was going through loss, that it was okay to cry, and it was okay to seek comfort, and it was okay to seek community, and it was also, and she was very particular about like she needed to be in her room when she needed to be in her room, and she didn't try to socialize with people at all when she wasn't feeling it. And on the flip side, when she was feeling it, she was like, yes, please come and visit. And she, and so that also was very helpful to me, because I think there's this thing about like you feel obligated to let people in, and you feel obligated to put on a smile when you're feeling grief. And she taught me that you don't.
Yeah.
You can be in your emotion,
Yeah.
and that's okay. Yeah.
I
And
Go ahead.
yeah, and so yeah, whenever I told her about a pregnancy or whatever, like the sparkles in her eyes, and like, and don't skip rope, don't you go and skip rope. It was such a joy, and it was such a pleasure to experience that.
I can really take a lot away from that because I think about when people are going through this and making these decisions. It's really helpful to hear that because I'm thinking about what I read about her, and it really changes now how I understand the interactions you have. Because I also noticed that you don't talk very much. You have a very listening role in there. And I think that what you're sharing now is helpful. There's so many tips to kind of take away from that. One is that she did give you the permission to feel your feelings. One of the biggest obstacles that I find many people, I had as well too, this is not other thing, is sometimes it's hard to feel the feelings because there's a lot of not so good feelings. And also the I want to follow up on that. There was another picture you gave, was this was I think it's page 162. It's not in order, but the when is it your role to take care of yourself, and when do you have to say, I am not in the mood to talk to anybody else?
Okay, tell me which page
And
that
162.
was. That this one?
No, it was one where You're at the end, the last panel on the page is when you're like, no, that wasn't my experience, but please go on.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I could tell I have a friend who I was like, oh
that
yeah, this one right there.
one.
Because it was just like, yes, like, how do you give yourself permission? This was what I thought was this is you have, I don't know, a montage of a few of these scenes, and I can tell she is an amalgamation of a bunch of different people. When someone says, oh, right, and my husband did this, and oh, we did that, and we did that, and you're like, okay, like, you point out, like, I'm single, like, clearly saying this is not what it is for me. And then again at the end, the picture on the end was just, I thought, oh, I wish I had physically done this so many times. When you do, you just want to cover your eyes and be like, no, it's fine, but go on. And I thought the struggle we have, exactly what you just said a minute ago, of, you know, do you want to be polite? And at the same time, like, I really don't want to be here doing this. And so I thought this one was a really interesting thing. Was this, I'm guessing, was this a montage of people, and how did you deal it? Because in here, you're just kind of going in yourself. What was this like? And was this like a lot of people put into this one shadow of a person?
It's actually both. It was one person in particular. I changed her story a little bit just to, yeah, but yeah. But yeah, she had heard, because I've been pretty public about my attempts and the miscarriages and everything that was happening. I was pretty public about that on social media, and she wrote me a private message saying pretty much this.
Wow.
And you know, so it wasn't a face-to-face interaction, but I was like, oh my God. Like, I appreciate the sentiment, but I don't even know what to say. I don't know how to respond. I was like, and I could feel the resentment, and I could feel the bitterness, and I could feel the like, ugh, this is so not the same. But oh my God, but then I feel guilty. Like, how do I felt so guilty about the option of responding that our stories are not the same. So I don't know if I actually ever did respond to her, which is, I guess, the dubious advantage of having it as a Facebook message.
I'm not sure if that's better or worse to think that that was sent in a message, or if someone said it in person. Now that you mention it, I don't.
Yeah,
I guess you're true. The benefit of an email is you can disregard an email or a Facebook message a little easier than someone right in front of you.
Yeah. But I mean, so many things like this happen to me face to face as well. And there's a few other pages that I talk about where there's like the outside me, and then there's my biological going, ew, like, no, I'm so angry, no. And it got to the point really where I didn't care anymore how I reacted. And like, certain things I kept my cool, and I was like, and inside I'm like, seething. But some of that is like, don't even say it. And I'd like put my hand out and like, don't say it. And somehow like people just, they don't twig to it, and they would say it. And I'm like, I told you not to say it. I knew you were going to say that. And they're like, how did you know? I'm like, because everybody says that. And, you know, like, I'm sure it's coming from a good place, but like, yes, I have thought of this. Yes, I have considered this option. I've tried this. I've done this. And like, yes, but I don't have your body. And that's great that your friend who's 45 just had twins and blah, 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 but I don't have her body, and I don't have her, you know, like, her story is different than mine. And so, yeah, there was a lot of that. Yeah.
This is like a huge public service announcement. When I saw this, that's why this stood out to me, because I think that many people are going through this, and I kind of wanted to talk about that also, is that you're someone who is open about it and you get this. Mm-hmm. So I think it's unfair to think that you invited this. Just because you're being open about something on your life doesn't mean that people should give you advice about what's going on in your life or input, or just such a public service announcement in this. It's like, you know, if you're going to share your story, ask. Like, I could just list 20 different things about what to do and what not to do based on these pages. So, but to me, it just seemed, I think for people considering going through this, for people who are going through this, for people who have been through this page is relatable on every level of just the tension between it's personal. I know that I'm open about it, but like really, there has to be some boundaries. The other thing about this, which makes me think about this, and it doesn't come up in here except for you say it right on the first page, because many people who come in, and I remember at one part of my journey, someone said to me, don't listen to pretty much anyone because this is what's different about you and you have to tune it out. And your first panel right up there says, I'm single. And we talked about this a little bit beforehand, that books like yours and your sharing does a huge amount to remove the stigma. And I know you talk also in the book about how when you posted it on Facebook or Instagram, how people would share their stories and it would open up in conversations. In my experience, infertility in general is much less stigmatized. Like, I'm not whispering the word infertility. However, I do think that there are pockets of stigma, and I think one of them is around single women, single people. I won't say single women, around single people. One is around older women. Older men do not get the same stigma. And the other is about third-party reproduction. People seem to think that if a heterosexual couple is, that this is what this is about, a heterosexual married couple who is going to go through this and they faced it. And you are blessed with stigma busting all three of those. Can you talk about any of them, all of them, or just a little bit, because I'm sensitive to the time, because I do know that there's people on here who can relate to all of those.
So the stigmas of being a single mother, an older single mother, and third party reproduction.
Yeah. Did it make a difference to you? Did you feel any of that stigma, or was it?
I definitely did not have any stigma around third-party reproduction. I had a lot of questions about it. I had a lot of like, how do you choose the donor, and what's important to you, and maybe I stigmatized myself in a lot of ways because, you see a counselor and they're like, we highly recommend you pick a donor who is of the same race as you, and where you can imagine that the baby that you will produce kind of looks like you. And so I'm like, but that's really racist. And there's like all this stuff that goes along. There's a lot of baggage that comes with it. And a lot of like, I talk about it a little bit about like, how weird is it that you're picking somebody, not like you're dating, but like you're picking somebody because of their health and because of their looks and because of their IQ, and you want the best possible of all of those. And that means that it's extremely discriminatory. And like, what does that mean about me?
That's interesting, by the way. I just have to note that because many people feel that way. But the interesting thing is we discriminate when we date too. Like, we have to make those choices, but we tend to think of it as a positive thing. Like, we don't notice the things we're not choosing. Mm-hmm. When we're dating, we're choosing that too, like ostensibly on the belief that if you date someone, you'd marry them and have children. So I just want to point out also, because like what I'm hearing for you, and I get it, I was there, like this self-judgment of, ew, it doesn't feel right, because we don't recognize how much we're doing that anyways, of filtering things in and out. But there is that element of kind of, should I be judging myself? Is this right or wrong? And the reality, which you show with a bit of humor, you do have to make the decision.
Yeah. You do. You do. And like, I do find like when I was dating, it was much less of an issue. It was more like, do I like this person? Are they
Mhm.
kind? Are they
Yeah.
funny? Are they, like basically intelligent? Like, and I never, I didn't ask them, did your parent ever have cancer? Did you, like, what is your gene pool like? That's not part of the conversation generally. So to me, it was a bit of a shock to the system to kind of be faced with that.
And I think that
But
that also is what brings up the stigma,
yeah,
because people do think of it as the designer baby is
yeah,
the negative stereotype. Because of the fact you have to go through that, I think that part of the assumption is that there's some nefarious thing that's going to happen
right,
because you made those choices without just saying, no, but are they a nice person? Which is hard to read on a piece of paper.
yeah. Although the essays were really nice to read, and also I like I would they also talk about like what are your politics and what are this, and it was actually really important to me that they were on the left and that they were kind people and that they did good things in the world and um, yeah. In terms of being a single woman, um, what I found was often, especially guys, would be like, I don't get it. You're so pretty and you're so smart. How come you haven't met anybody yet?
Can I translate that for you, by the way? Because I remember getting that. You look normal, but what's wrong with you?
Pretty much. Yeah, that was
Right?
the unspoken message.
Yeah.
And that just it killed me every time because it really digs into the self-confidence and you don't notice it until, the 100th time that somebody is asking you this question and I'm like, what is wrong with me?
Right.
Why haven't I met that person? Why can't I get my shit together to like make that ideal family? And like what is fundamentally wrong with me? And so that was the big one for me. Um, the Now that I have um, after all of that, I do have my rainbow babies, and they're twins. And now what I'm getting is, oh, you must be so busy, or your hands must be so full. And I'm like, yeah, but you have 2 or 3 or 4 kids. Like, what's the difference? And so there's this weird assumption that all of a sudden it's so much harder for me to be a mom because I'm on my own, or because I have twins, or because XYZ, which is totally not the case because a lot of parents have to, they're either they or their partner, if they have one, or if they're single, have to work. And so somebody in that parent combination is spending most of the time with the kid or kids. And it's I think it's very, very similar. Um, and yeah, so yeah, and then I also have like this weird knee jerk reaction around the, oh my God, my partner is off for a week. I'm going to be a solo mom for a week. And not to downplay
Yeah.
that it's difficult,
Yes. That is
but it's
something
also,
hard probably for you to hear when you're like, yes, it's context. I mean, that's again, that
yeah,
speaks to the context.
yeah,
Context is everything.
everything. Yeah. And then to be an older woman, it's more like hearing it third hand and hearing doctors say, oh, oh, you're in
Advanced
your 40s.
maternal
The
age.
whole like the lingo around it. I'm a geriatric mother, or it's a geriatric pregnancy,
I always
or
heard advanced maternal age. That's a new one. I've never heard
yeah,
geriatric.
yeah, geriatric. Yeah, that was a good one.
The language, medical language is
Ter-
not warm fuzzy. It's just not.
it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. Um, yeah, I don't know. I think that there are enough people around me who have had their babies, in their late 30s or in their 40s that I haven't really come across too much of it. It's mostly stuff that I see when I on the support groups or the online support groups on Facebook or whatever. where people are really like, what? Like, I'm facing this, and how do you respond to that? And yeah.
I'm curious. Someone wrote in, because I talked about your the sperm donor page. I think I wrote down the page number and I had you pull it. Let me see if we have that one to show you. Well, I wrote down page 61, but I don't know if that's it.
61.
Did I have you pull
Oh, there's the, yeah, it was a set of 3 pages, right? It was when the first IUI.
It was the one where you did the eeny meeny. I didn't know if I
Oh,
pulled
yeah.
that page or yeah.
Um, let's see if I can find it. People get the, there we go.
Yeah, you get the flavor. There we go. There's one of them. That was the picture. And I pulled that too. Someone asked about that. And this was, so when you're talking about choosing them,
Yeah.
can you can you just talk for 1 minute quickly? Because we touched on this balance of choosing things, and then what did it ultimately come down to?
The first thing that was most important was their health history. So between these two men, so basically I did Excel sheets. I had like hundreds of donors. I made Excel sheets with their of guys that I was kind of interested in. I put their photos. I put their health history. I put their IQ. I put their, a couple of other details in there. And then I whittled it down from there. And so these two guys had, I mean, keep in mind they're in their early 20s. So it's also a bit of a weird way to go about it. But anyways, yeah. Clean slate on the health. Nothing wrong in their parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts, sisters, brothers, themselves. So that was number one important for me. And then they were, in terms of looks, they were the ones that I felt the most attracted to. And I would kind of like imagine in my head, okay, if their eyes mixed with my hair, or like how would our ears look like in a third person, and I just kind of like made this big imaginary mishmash of like what would their genes look like with my genes, and so that was kind of a big, yeah.
I think that's one of the things I kind of wanted to say it because it was also like looking in the picture. Anyone who goes through third-party reproduction has to go through this, and it's just strange because it's just like no one you don't grow up thinking, I wonder who I'm going to pick as my sperm donor. Like I said, you're dating and we're used to that. Like we don't ever imagine the mechanics of what we went through when we do fall in love or, whatnot, have the partner. And then when you say it out loud and you show it in your book too, the images really start. Because I remember those charts. I remember having the papers on the floor. And doing it. And before it was like you just went on a date one at a time and you don't think this way. It really shifts you out. So I also thought that the images, these were also one of the ones that I felt the images in your book were way better than anything I've ever read. I mean, yes, it's nice to know what someone's going to go into, but it's really different. So a couple more questions. I know we're coming. I want to make sure we get some in. There's 2 questions. I'm going to ask one first in case it's different. I'm curious in all of this because making those decisions is kind of awkward, but it doesn't sound like it was the hardest thing. What was the most challenging part of the experience for you?
Oh gosh. Which part of the experience? I think that every kind of unit of time and experience had its own particular challenges. Obviously, losing a baby to miscarriage or to genetic fetal anomaly was emotionally some of the hardest things. The The termination, I had to go through one termination. Um, and that that was so hard. That just, I don't regret it, but it was so gut and heart wrenching going through that. Um, and it's, like a miscarriage, the physical part of it lasts. I mean, no, I shouldn't even say that, because sometimes a miscarriage can last for a very long time. Yeah. Um, but what's missing from the miscarriage aspect is the decision to have that miscarriage. You do not make a decision to have a miscarriage. You have to make a decision to terminate a baby that has genetic problems, that you just don't know what the end is going to be. And so it was absolutely, um, yeah, it was the most drawn out and the most mixed bag of emotions, um, that I experienced.
Can you share
Um,
some of the pictures, by the way? I think I
yeah,
had you pull out page 125, 128, and 130, because something you just said reminded me of the phenomena. And as you're pulling those up, we said it before too, and I think it's because
there's 125.
there it is.
Oops, sorry. Oop, there's 125.
There's one of them.
Okay, so the termination happened in 2 days, two sequences. This is where the right after the first day, where they put laminaria in to kind of prep your cervix for it. And um, I almost actually didn't go through with it, because it was so, like, my body just rebelled completely. Like, my mind was like, no, I'm still going through this, and my physical body was just like, no. Um, but with my sister's support and my mom's support, like, I was able to go through with it. And this is the car ride home.
I think this is significant because I think that I just want to point out, especially for people who are watching this, is that um, this is real. This is real grief. I mean, I think that for many people, for people who have not gone through pregnancy loss, um, and they want to say they compare it to, losing a spouse or your grandmother or something, but I remember this feeling, not on pregnancy loss, which I also had, but that exact phrase, when you're just like, I mean, that's loss. Wait a minute, the world is missing something and no one's noticing it.
Yeah,
And it's a compound loss, because like that's the thing about this, is that you haven't finalized this. This hasn't even happened yet.
yeah,
But there's so many layers to the loss that here after stage one, you're already recognizing it, and that's the
yeah,
grief.
yeah. And so this image here is at the hospital just before the termination. And it was really, really hard, because it took me a long time to get to the point where I'm like, why am I not crying? Why am I not able to feel the emotions attached to a forever goodbye to a baby who's inside me, who I really want? Um, and there was a woman on the other side of the curtain in the waiting, kind of like in the, yeah, where you wait, basically. And she started crying, and that triggered me. And I just was finally able to give him the emotional goodbye that I wanted to, and that he deserved. And I just cried a lot. And that walk from the waiting room to the surgical room, it's it's like it's like nothing else. It's desolate. It's there's people around you. I mean, I don't have the nurses and the doctors bustling around me in this image, but it doesn't matter, because that's how I felt. I'm completely alone in this, and it, yeah, it's just emptiness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The image here was so powerful to me. It was
Mm-hmm.
when I pulled it out. I didn't matter if that's what I thought. What stood out about this picture is because rarely are you actually ever left on your own, but it doesn't matter if there are other people there.
Yeah.
And it's and single or even married, every individual has to go through this. One of our clients wrote an amazing story, and she's married in an amazing marriage, but she also talked about the fact that you still have to go through this alone. Like when you walk down that, no matter who is, you wouldn't even notice. It's your own experience. Is very powerful.
Yeah.
So in the last question that I want to ask, let's see, we have a Q&A. So good, we have another question. Okay, I did have another one, but this is, I like that she asked this question. Someone wrote in to say they want to hear more about how, when, why did you decide to tell people about this experience?
It's a good question. I mean, part of it was because I went in it as a single mom by choice. And I, the festival that I ran was very community oriented. And I used to have these giant parties called fig jams because my house is nicknamed the fig house because of a giant fig tree that's growing in the backyard. And I would just invite everybody I knew. And I've always, especially in my adulthood, been really, the community's been really important to me. And it's been a source of inspiration. It's been a source of support. It's been a source of pretty much, it feeds me, it feeds my soul. And so when I was alone and getting pregnant alone and being rejoicing in that, like, who are you going to share it with? And then when I started having miscarriages and failed attempts at pregnancy, who are you going to share it with? And at some point I was like, I kind of had it in the back of my mind that I was actually going to do something with my story. And then I was like, I need to have that out there. I need to have, I need to be heard. I need to know that people care, even if it's very peripherally, even if it's just this like flash in the pan, I love you, I thinking about you. It's like this collective consciousness pillowing me. It's like this cloud of support that I don't know who out there who has read my post. There's maybe 100 people who have responded. So I know those people, but I know there's like so many more because I bump into them on the street. I'm like, oh, I've been following your story. And I'm like, really? And it's like this, they're part of that collective consciousness of support. And it just felt so tangible, even though I didn't know who was following my story. And it's like, I've always wanted to be a diary writer. I've always wanted to write a journal, and I just never did. And I've never like sat down and be like, okay, I'm just going to do this. And it's really ironic because my mind just goes blank and I don't know what to write on the page. But when it's these little captions of my life, it just felt really solid and really grounding and really cathartic and really important for me emotionally. And also it was like more and more like, if I share my story, I know other people will share their story. And then the conversation starts opening up, and in a sense, it doesn't really matter how I feel about what I'm writing. Like if it's a really uncomfortable post for me to write about, especially things like the termination, super uncomfortable for me. Like I just like, oh God. And I choose my language very, very carefully. But there are so many other people out there who are going through the same thing or something similar, and they've had to make choices and decisions like that. And to know that you're not alone in that choice was something that I really wished I had had. And if I can give that to somebody, then I think it's really important to be able to do that.
You did a very important thing. And as I was listening to you, I was thinking about the last thing we had just talked about, that image of our being alone. And I think that it's a private issue, and it becomes really hard to decide, when we want to open ourselves up and when we don't want to.
Mm.
And as I was listening, I was thinking about this needing to feel connected, because it's so isolating. And by the way, I have a million more questions for you, because one of them was about privacy and the fact that this is a graphic novel.
No holds barred.
No holds barred. And the power of that. But I think that's just it, is because, like, you don't sit down. I think to myself, when people would say, how come you didn't talk about it when you're going through it? It's like, well, how's your day? Well, I just passed a miscarriage this morning. Like, you don't say those things. And how do you express them? And at the same time, this need to feel connected, that what you're going through connects to others. Not because it's like an ego thing, but it's just the fact that I'm human and others experience this, and I'm not alone in this. And I know others are going through this or will go through this. And that being seen makes you feel human, because as you also said, and I showed that pictures, it's dehumanizing. I mean, it's not your body anymore. You're like a lab, a baby making lab. So I find your answer to be what you said was very relatable for me. Myriam, thank you so much. For those of you who are listening, I highly recommend this book. And I'm not someone who recommends a lot of books. It was not because they're not good, it's because everything is so different. This book is a gift. This book is truly a gift, especially because I think, as we've said, it's very hard to capture everyone's experience. And Myriam, you do have a lot of experiences in here that you share. So many people who have had the ups and downs will find a lot of them in here. But I think what really struck me most, though, is the fact that this is a very visceral, combined visceral and real, it's real. And while it is an internal mental experience, there's the reality of imagining that you do get these probes, like there are people touching you, and it puts a reality onto this. And it's not, what's the word? It's not kind of like scary or anything. It helps connect and relate. I think it just brings it real, and it does destigmatize so much of what we've done. I think you've made an amazing gift to the world, and to those who are going through this. And I can say for myself, I wish there had been a book like this when I was going through it. But even being on a different side of it, it's healing, because I still, as you said, the grief process comes and goes. And I also hope that, as I know I said, we have some single women on here too. I think it's helpful, because it's not a cautionary tale in as much as I don't think it scares people away, but I think it's just really real. And maybe as a blessing to your grandmother's memory, it's kind of pragmatic. Like, you just kind of say, this is what it is. And I thought about her as I was thinking of this. You kind of took the pragmatic of it, and you didn't sugarcoat it, and you didn't glorify it, nothing. It's there. If there's anyone watching, yes, you can quote me about this. I think this is a great book. So thank you so much. Again, I could keep asking you so many more questions. Yes, show the book. It is available. I think the link was put into the, yes, someone wrote in. See, someone wrote in and said, can we have a part 2? It's so helpful and relevant. I'm open to it. I would love to have more conversation. I think it's really wonderful. Maybe something where we can have more people ask questions than just this, for you to talk so much about your book. We did put a link in there to the book. It's available online. I encourage people to read it and share about it. So thank you, Myriam, and to all of you who came today, or who may be watching this on Facebook Live or watching this in the future. Please check out the book. And also know this was sponsored by Hasidat. We do have other resources and programs coming out. Maybe it'll be a part 2 to this. Check it out. You are not alone. And we will be here for you. Thank you again, Myriam. And
thank you. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Really appreciate it. And thank you.